proud co-founder of Omen Brewing, a family-run brewery here in Edmonton. How you doing, man?
Great. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm fantastic. We're hanging out in Edmonton for like the week, so getting to connect with a lot of breweries. Can't really complain that way.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so family-run business. I'm always fascinated by people like yourself that can successfully run family businesses because it's not always easy. There's 3 brothers and your dad, is that right?
Yeah, so it's the three of us. So
Okay.
it's, my two brothers,
Okay.
myself, which makes 3, and then our dad, yeah.
Okay, awesome. When did you guys start? How did this idea come about? When did you guys think, as a family, we should start a business?
Well,
Or
it
a brewery?
wasn't the whole family that had the same idea at the same time. So Spencer and I, we've been home brewers for quite some time, and we always thought it would be fun to start up our own brewery, and we talked about it for years, but it was just never really anything that was feasible for us to do. And then one day, it was. So we just were like, hey, we should do this. So we started off kind of looking into it, and when he found out we were serious about it, he was like, well, if you guys are doing this, then I want to join in too.
Right.
I mean, he'll tell a different story about how we forced him to come on board, but it's not the case.
Dads always have a slightly different version
Yeah.
of reality. It's good.
And then my older brother, we asked him if he wanted to join in too, and he was like, no, I'm good. I don't really want to do that. That doesn't seem like anything that I'm interested in. And then he went to work the next day, and one of his coworkers was like, if your family's starting up a brewery and you don't get involved, you're going to regret that for the rest of your life. So then he, the next day, was like, okay, I changed my mind. I'll join. So we're like, great, perfect. We need more people to share the debt and, a little bit of extra revenue. And
Yeah.
it's kind of how we got started.
Awesome. Yeah, it's funny because when people start a business, I've had people ask me about, starting whatever it is, a festival or something like that, and their numbers are always how they're going to divvy up the profit, and I'm always like, well, actually, you got to figure out how you're going to divvy up the debt because it would take you a long time if you're going to make money, and people like to think about the money they're going to make and not, what it properly takes to start a business. So you guys decide to start the business. What was the original vision? So it was you and your brother Spencer that were home brewers?
Yeah. So we got actually started homebrewing kind of by fluke. We were walking through Liquidation World one day, and we found a discount brew kit. So it came with a pail, the malt extract, and like a draw meter, and you just kind of mixed it all together and let it ferment. And we saw that, and I was like, hey, we should buy this. It's like $12. Like, we'll get 5 gallons of beer, and it's cheap. And he's like, oh, it's gonna be gross. Like, no way, man. And I was like, well, I'm buying it anyways. It's like $12, big deal. It's not gonna wreck the bank. So we bought it, we brewed it. It turned out quite nice. We enjoyed it, and so then we just were like, hey, let's keep going. So we just started brewing from there. And then he was like, well, this isn't really brewing. If we're gonna brew, we got to get into all grain brewing. So then he started doing all grain brewing, and then he built himself a little homebrew setup, and then just kind of snowballed from there.
So did you guys kind of both get the bug? Because it seems like he had to get kind of convinced to do it, but then all of a sudden it was like, okay, let's step it up. Were you guys kind of both passionate about it?
Yeah, Spencer takes things a little bit differently than I do, so he kind of went to the extreme really quickly,
Right.
where I was content with just brewing in the pails, and when we did get into all grain brewing, I was content with just doing it on my stovetop and everything. But he was like, no, if we're gonna do this, I gotta go bigger because it's just easier that way. So
Right.
yeah, and he built his own brew system. He got some old kegs that he was able to purchase, and he cut the tops off of them and drilled out some holes and welded in some parts to it, and
Yeah.
made himself his own little keg brew system so he could brew about 50 liters of beer at a time.
That's awesome. So from when you guys decided, okay, we're going to start this brewery, how long did it take for it to be a reality where you were, drinking a beer in the tap room?
Okay, so we had our first official meeting as Omen Brewing. We weren't incorporated yet or anything, but this is when we sat down, all 4 of us, to actually discuss what we were going to do in September of 2016. And then in think it was March or April of 2017 we were incorporated, and then in the December of 2018 is when we opened the doors, and then I quit my job to work there full time in September of 2019, and then we were going pretty good, and then in January, February, well, you know what happened in 2020, so everything kind of changed a little bit at that point.
That's crazy. So what was the initial vision for the brewery, and for the, like, did you guys want to be a tasting room, a tap room? Did you guys see yourself as maybe more of a brewery that was going to distribute more? Like, what was your kind of initial thought of what the brewery was going to look like?
Well, originally we knew we needed to have a tap room because we knew that was where we were going to make our money when we started off. But our plan was to always at some point become a production brewery. It's kind of changed a little bit since then. We do realize now that a 10-barrel brew system is not quite big enough to be a production brewery. We're finding it difficult to actually get into restaurants and liquor stores and feed the tap room at the same time. So we're maybe thinking about expanding a little bit here in next year or something.
Yeah.
See how that goes. It depends on how things keep going throughout the winter and fall, the fall and winter, but that's kind of the plan.
And then, so you mentioned you guys were home brewers. How is that transition? Because you go from home brewing to, commercial brewing. Even just the scale, I'm sure, is a little bit difficult. Was that a steep learning process for you guys?
Yeah. I don't know how what the rating is on your podcast here. I don't know if I can get into too much dirty details.
You can swear all you want.
All right. Well, I always compare our first brew to losing your virginity. It was was hard. It was sloppy. It was messy. You were tired at the end of it, and you just were happy. It was a good day, but it was a long day, and it was just really challenging to figure out how everything worked and to get everything in play. I mean, now we had 4 guys brewing the first batch of beer, and we were running all over the place. So we had so much wort on the floor, spillage, everything. Now Spencer does it pretty much all by himself. So It's like we've really fine-tuned
that's awesome.
How it goes.
Well, if you figure out either of those two things on day one, you're doing really good. Yeah. So, okay, so then with that, you guys are both being home brewers, but how do you then define roles once you start the brewery? Like, first of all, let's start with, like, what is your role with the brewery?
My role is pretty much everything. I manage the tap room. I do a little bit of brewing. I do packaging. I do sales. Like, we always get people asking, like, "Oh, give us your sales rep," and well, we don't really have a sales rep. Like, I do sales very, very part-time. But like, that's kind of what I do. I work the tap room a little bit at the beginning. Now we have staff. I still do when we need to do it, but
right.
I'm just kind of everywhere.
Yeah. Whatever needs to be kind of done in the background and making sure things are just operating smoothly. And then Spencer is the brewer?
Yeah, so Spencer does the primarily just brewing. So he does brewing and like packaging and stuff like that, and then he does a lot of cleaning of the tanks and all that stuff. And then he also does like the brewery management side of things as well. So he tracks the inventory and does the AGLC reports and stuff like that on that end.
And then, so then how do you guys decide as a group, what your roles are going to be? How did you get, tasked with your job? And then because if you guys were both home brewing, was there ever a thought that maybe you would become the brewer?
Well, it was, when we started off, Spencer always wanted to be like the head brewer. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to brew the beer, and that's what he wanted to do. And I wanted to kind of run the business. My older brother, when he was involved, like, he's taken a step back now. He doesn't really do much in the brewery anymore. But when he originally started, he was he's an insurance wholesale salesman or whatever. So he was really good at managing paperwork and going through all like the stuff with the city and all that. So he kind of did all that. So he sort of took on the managerial role at the start. But now that we have that all kind of sorted out, he's taken a step back and I've kind of taken over.
Yeah, nice. Okay. So when it comes to developing recipes, Did you guys start off with a certain type of philosophy of the type of beers that you wanted to make?
Yeah, so when we were developing our business plan, we always kept getting asked the same question from every, like the banks and anywhere we were trying to get money from was like, well, what separates you from all the other breweries? And we'd always give the same answer that most breweries give, where it's like, oh well, we want to be a local craft brewery that uses premium ingredients and makes good quality beer at a reasonable price, and and we kind of thought like maybe we need to step outside of that a little bit too. So we came up with the idea of focusing kind of more on darker styles of beer, and as being dark beer drinkers, whenever we'd go to the liquor store, we'd find that there'd always be a huge selection of pale ales and IPAs and stuff like that, but there was always that small section with stouts and porters and dunkels and things like that. So we felt that there was a need to fill that void. So we started off brewing primarily all dark beers, and it took us a little while to get people on board with that. We'd get a lot of people who'd come in and be like, "Oh, it's all dark. I don't like dark beer. I don't like dark beer," but we'd convince them to try some and sample it, and usually they'd like it and they'd leave with a growler or a 4-pack or something.
Right.
And now we get people who are coming in specifically because we do dark beers.
Yeah, and I think it is an important thing to have like a niche. Like you can experiment, but there's a niche that you're filling. Do you guys have a core lineup of beers?
Yeah, so our core lineup are the ones that we kind of have out in Liquor Connect at the moment. So it would be our Spilt Milk Stout. So it's our milk stout. It's we add a little bit of lactose sugar to it, gives it a sweeter edge, cuts down on the bitterness of the roasted malts. It's won us a silver medal 2 years in a row for stouts, so that's pretty good. Then we have our Blueberry Session Ale, which is like a dunkel, like a wheat beer, like a darker wheat ale that we add some blueberries to. It gives it a nice blueberry aroma and flavor. It's quite popular. And then we have our Red Harbor, which is our Irish Red Ale. It's won a silver medal 2 years in a row as well, so pretty pleased with that. And then one of the other one that doesn't fit that dark beer kind of category, but it's our gluten-free beer.
Yeah.
Our Behave, the one that I'm drinking right now.
Yeah. And that seems like a unique one. That when you were describing it to me, it doesn't sound like anything that I've ever heard of. Is that a unique thing that you guys kind of created yourselves?
I'd like to think it is.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any other brewery that has anything even close to this. That being said, I mean, it wasn't like we just knew what we kind of like to drink. Like I was telling you earlier that my wife's celiac, so she couldn't drink beer. And when I was getting into craft beer, I would drink a lot of gluten-free craft beers because of my wife, and I always felt that they fell flat and they were missing something. And so when we had the brewery going, and I was like, I want to brew a beer that my wife can at least drink. I wanted to brew something that tasted good, but wasn't missing something. So I wanted to try and create something completely different that wasn't like any other gluten-free beer out there.
Right.
And that's kind of how we came up with this.
And it's become one of your favorites, or one of your most popular?
Yeah, it's one of our top sellers. Yeah, for sure. Those 4 beers that are our core beers are our 4 best sellers.
Yeah. So we were talking about before the brewery. You were an electrician, correct?
I was, yeah.
I always find it funny because when somebody goes from one career to another career, so starting a brewery, a lot of people would look at that and say there's no connection between being an electrician and running a brewery. But oftentimes there's a lot of things you learn in your past that really are helpful. As an electrician, as a background, what is it about that profession that's been helpful for you and kind of helped you succeed as managing a brewery?
Well, I was an electrician, and I also kind of did I had a house renovation company with my dad too for a little while. It was just very small. It was just the 2 of us really, and we'd renovate houses and then sell them. And so I learned how to do a lot of other things as well than just electrical. But coming from the electrical trade has been great because we were able to hook up our equipment when it showed up, right? We did a lot of the renovations in the tap room ourselves as well. We were able to, we essentially built out the bar. We hooked up all of our own equipment. We built our cooler from scratch.
Yeah.
Like we did a bunch of stuff that other places would have to pay someone to come in and do, which saved us a lot of money at the start of the
Yeah.
the build out.
That's awesome. Okay, so challenges. So when I would have first met you guys, when did the tasting room open?
December of 2018.
Okay, so it wouldn't have been very far after that. That I remember coming into Edmonton. I was with my friend Rob Swiderski, and we stopped in at the tap room. So, you had say a little over a year under the belt, and then COVID hits. So as a new brewery, and especially with it being a family business, I would imagine a pretty stressful time.
Yeah.
We did chat I chatted with you guys over Zoom when COVID started, just to check in and see how you guys were doing. We did a little podcast there. Now, hopefully, looking at COVID kind of in the rear view mirror, how were you guys able to survive that?
Well, being a family-run business, I think, was part of the reason why we were able to. We didn't have to worry about staff, really, right? We knew that our wages were really all we had to cover, so we did have two part-time staff members at that time. So we laid them off, and then we just kind of hunkered down and just did what we could. There's a lot of late hours, a lot of extra stuff that we had to do to make ends meet. Deliveries. I remember doing deliveries until like midnight some nights, and
Yeah.
there was this one time I was way out in the middle of nowhere on an acreage at like 11:30 at night with 12 boxes of beers. At the time we only did it in bomber bottles, and I had 12 boxes of bombers, and I'm at this guy's house trying to drop off the beer, and his dog is barking at me, and the house looks like everyone's asleep. And I go and I knock on the door, and his wife comes, and she's like, oh my gosh, she scared the shit out of me. Like, I thought I was going to get murdered. And I'm like, no, I'm here to drop off beer. And she's like, oh, I didn't think you were coming today. And I'm like, it's got to be today because I got the same amount of deliveries tomorrow. And so we just did it that way. And I dropped off the beer and took off. And it was the last delivery of the night. And it was like, 11:30.
That's awesome. Were there things that happened, like, I know talking to a bunch of people, the creativity that was kind of forced upon people to survive through COVID, right? Were there things that happened as a result of COVID that have actually maybe helped your business? Like ideas like, I don't know, do you still do deliveries? Are there ideas that kind of came up that are still around?
We don't do the delivery anymore. It's just too much. But we do still have like our online store and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But COVID forced us to grow. Essentially, like I said before, we were kind of more taproom focused,
right,
when we started off, and when COVID hit, we had to kind of get more into the production side. And since we were just doing bottles, we were just doing bomber bottles for takeaway. It was hard to get into liquor stores with those. A lot of liquor stores didn't want those.
Yeah.
That's kind of something from like the earlier 2000s and the later 2010s. So that was kind of obsolete, and they didn't want those. So we had to move into cans, like we were forced to. So we ended up going with the mobile canning for a little while.
Yeah.
But then since we weren't a full-on production facility, the mobile canning was just too much. It was too expensive. We had to do too much beer all at one time, and then trying to sell it was just really difficult. So then we bought a little manual express fill can filler and an October can seamer, and you'd spend night after night filling and seaming.
Yeah.
And then it started to get busy enough that we had the demand for the cans, so we hired someone to come on and just fill cans. And that was his job, 8 hours a day, filling cans. He'd get like 30 flats done, and the next day those 30 flats would be gone, and he'd be back at it.
Wow.
So that was a little bit of a challenge, but we now have like a full-on canning machine. Things go a little bit quicker and smoother now.
Nice. I like asking people about, the beer community. I think we would all agree that it is a unique community. But I like when people give me specific stories. So one of the stories that you were sharing was something happening where you needed to fill a demand. There's an order, and Analog kind of stepped in to help you out. So maybe talk about that, because that's a really nice specific example of like what this community is all about.
So this is back in 2020 when the pandemic first started, and nobody knew what was going to happen, and we actually ended up getting a contract for a golf course. That was our first ever. It was a huge contract. We needed to be able to produce quite a bit of beer for them, and so we had arranged for a vessel to come in and can our product, and everything was ready to go. And then when the pandemic hit, everything kind of got shut down. Nobody knew what was happening, so we canceled everything. Even the golf course canceled the order. So everything got canceled, but we still had the beer because we were like, well, we'll sell it ourselves, and then they opened up the golf courses, and so we were on we had a week to get the beer from the tank into cans, and so we called up Vessel, and they were like, oh, unfortunately the wait time is like 6 months. You're not going to be able to get it in anytime soon. And so we were like, shoot, what are we going to do? So we called around a little bit, and I ended up talking to Adam and Brian from Analog, and I told them what we were going through, and they were like, you know what, I think we can help. So they essentially mobile canned for us, right? And they we had to put the beer in kegs, and then they can it for us out of the brewery, and it was a lot of extra work that I don't ever want to do again, but at the same time it allowed us to keep the contract open and
Right.
please the client, and everything went really well. And so they did it about 3 or 4 times for us until we could get Vessel back in, and then they canned our beer from there on out. So I mean, it also, we now have like a great relationship with them, so we talk with Analog all the time, and
Yeah.
we're constantly doing stuff together, and we're doing a collab with them for one of their 12 beers of Christmas that we're doing, and
Nice.
stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, because like I said, people talk about it in kind of like an abstract idea how unique the community is. There's a lot of industries where they would have just said like, yeah, no, sorry, we're not going to help you, but we'll happily take the contract off your hands
Absolutely.
and produce beer for them, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then just other challenges, really. Like, you know, you think coming out of COVID, it's like, okay, we're good. But then the reality being, you know, there's staff shortages, there's inflation, there's still, you know, distribution challenges. Just the learning curve of, you know, running a small business like this and the realities of those challenges. Is it something that you guys are just like used to now, or how do you kind of deal with these things that come up?
I don't know if you ever get used to inflation, because it seems to just continue to creep up on you, and then everything else tends to get more expensive too. But you just roll with it.
Yeah.
Essentially, you don't have much of a choice. It would be nice if it would stop and go down, but like the cost of grain has gone up significantly. Cost of cans went up really quite a bit higher than it should have been. It's sort of stabilized now, and some of the places actually have dropped their prices by a few cents, which is good. But they're not anywhere where they were.
Yeah. Well, because it's hard though too, because those costs can be challenging to pass on, right?
Mm-hmm.
The consumer is kind of like, you know, okay, I'm willing to pay this kind of thing.
They have got an idea of what they're willing to pay, and that's it. If it goes above that, they're not touching it. I mean, it makes deliveries down to Calgary a little bit more challenging with the gas prices the way they are.
Yeah.
But I mean, you just do it, and you just realize that your profit margin is just going to be a little bit lower.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing lasts forever, so hopefully it eventually blows over and you can get back to...
Yeah. But you were saying this summer was particularly good for you guys, eh?
Yeah, summer was really busy. I don't know if it has anything to do with the Happy Beer Street, or I'm assuming it does, but it's just been... It was nuts. We had like a Super Amigo tacos out there every weekend, and we had live music on Thursdays and Saturdays, and we just had a packed patio.
Nice.
All summer long. They did a couple of Happy Beer Street events, and those were just insane. We always had them understaffed because we didn't know what to expect. So our staff that we have now are just fantastic. Everyone loves the staff. One of our bartenders, Aiden, went on holidays for like 2 or 3 weeks, and everyone thought he quit, and they were in like tears almost. No, he's coming back. He's just went home to visit his family.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's awesome. So you mentioned Happy Beer Street. So essentially that is it a collection of about 8 breweries down 99th Street and kind of in that area of Edmonton?
Yeah, I think it's about 6 at the moment, but there's 2 more that are going to be opening up here pretty soon. So yeah, it'll be 8 in total. Yeah.
And that's really cool. I think I was talking to Doug with Monolith earlier, and what's nice is just from the consumer's perspective, it really helps, paint that picture of how close all these breweries are. So it really becomes like, yeah, you can spend an afternoon and visit all these different places, and every one of you are so unique. You know what I mean? So there's just like there's different vibes going on at all the places. So I think it's a really unique marketing opportunity for you guys to kind of share your stories collectively.
It is, yeah. It's great. I mean, it really helps when everybody does such a great job in producing the beer that they make, right? And it's you go to every brewery and everybody's got something different. Like
Yeah.
if you don't like any beer at ours, go down to Long Roof, which is the next stop, and I'm sure you'll like one of theirs.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it's not too far down to, Blind Enthusiasm or Bed Sticker if you want to go the opposite direction to Sea Change or Alley Cat.
Yeah, totally. So then for you guys, if someone was to come into your tasting room, your tap room, maybe just explain what it is, because one of the things that you were saying that kind of surprised me is just how many beers you have on tap. So what is kind of the experience when someone comes into Omen? What is the Omen experience?
This is a question better suited for our bartender. I would say most people are excited to see, because like we have 20 taps available. They're not always full, but we usually have more than 14 beers on tap at all times. And so people come in, they see the amount, they get excited. We have a thing that we do that we call it a cruise. It's 10 samplers. So everyone always wants to do that. And so they're like, oh, now I got to just choose which 4 beers I don't want, or, depending on how many there are. When there's 20 beers on tap, it's half the board, so it's a little bit. So there's people that will like study the board. They'll go on Untapped, they'll look at the reviews, and they'll take like 10 minutes to figure out what they want to finally order. And it's great, right? Like trying something new, getting stuff different. I mean, you get some people who come in and they're still like, nope, I don't like dark beer. I only want your light beers. And it's like, okay, well, we've got 4 light beers on
Yeah.
on tap at the moment. So do you want me to repeat those, 2.5 times? And they're like, okay, fine. Give me, a couple of dark beers. But then, yes, repeat the light beers. So it's like, okay.
That's awesome. But you were mentioning, and what I love about, if people don't necessarily like dark beers, is I think, and I'm not trying to slam Guinness, but I think everybody, the people that typically don't gravitate towards dark beers, think that it's going to taste like a Guinness. And when they get to actually experiment with some darker beers, they realize that there's actually a lot of light flavors and a lot of you can have an easy drinking dark beer.
Absolutely. Whenever somebody says they don't like dark beer, we usually give them like the blueberry as a sample one, right?
Right.
And everyone loves that beer.